All right, everyone, a very warm welcome to all of you. So, today our topic of discussion is going to be the Blue Rebellion. And this is, of course, the last part of our journey, in which we had actually seen how the British East India Company essentially took control of the countryside and forced the farmers to cultivate crops that they wanted to for their own benefit, right? And of course, for the sake of profit, right? So, when we talk about the Blue Rebellion, right, it's a very interesting topic. Let us quickly see what is it about, what was the cause of this rebellion, and what exactly was its aftermath. Right. So by this point of time in the story, you realize that the farmers who are cultivating indigo are not exactly happy with the way they are being treated, right? Be it the Nij cultivation or the Ryoti cultivation, both of these forms of indigo cultivation are in dire straits. Right, so by the March of 1859, now this is 2 years after the 1857 revolution, right? So thousands of ryots in Bengal refused to grow indigo, right? So basically, they were once again in the mode of rebellion. They were already inspired by the events of 1857, and we all know what had happened in 1857. So they rebelled, wherein they refused to pay rent to the planters, right? Planters who were, of course, European. They attacked the indigo factories where indigo was cleaned, processed, and converted into the blue colored dye. And of course, even this particular protest also saw women participating with pots, pans, and other kitchen equipment. So there was participation of women as well in this fight for justice for the indigo cultivators, right? And not just that, there were these agents of the planters, like so-called security guards of the planters themselves, who were known as the gomasthas, right? They were also beaten up black and blue by these farmers, right? And of course, a lot of things were happening wherein the ryots, as in the farmers. Okay, now when we talk about ryots, the ryots are the farmers who cultivated indigo, right? So the ryots also swore that they will no longer take advances, as in cash advances, from the planters to sow indigo. Because if you remember, it was leading to a cycle of debt and poverty for the farmers, right? If you remember how it worked. So if there is a planter, the planter is going to give out some money to the farmer and tell the farmer that, you know what, take this money and grow the crops, right? So the farmer will grow the crops, but then there is no earning for the farmer because all the profit is being taken by the planter. So once again, the farmer will go to the planter, take a loan, and this cycle keeps repeating on and on and on. So it's a vicious cycle. Okay, so it's actually a vicious cycle of debt and poverty, right? So the ryots swore that they will no longer take cash advances from the planters to sow indigo, right? And surprisingly enough, for the first time in history, the people who were planting indigo, as in the ryots themselves, they had the support of the local zamindars and the village headmen, basically the panchayat, right? The sarpanch and local zamindars as well were supporting the peasants in their struggle against the indigo planters. Now, one might ask, why are the zamindars stepping in to help the peasants when they were always hand in glove with the British Empire? Right, so you will realize that I have written the reason here as to why the zamindars were supporting the farmers this time and not the planters, right? Because they were unhappy with the rising power of the planters. Okay, so now you need to understand the planters are European. Okay, the planters are European, and of course, the British are going to favor them and not the zamindars, right? So they were, of course, unhappy with the rising power of the planters, and unhappy since they were also forced to give their land to the planters. You remember that the planters used to take up land from the zamindars on rent, but they never actually gave any money to the zamindars, and they basically kept them away from all kind of profit as well. So you understand that the zamindars are pretty unhappy about it, right? Now this is from the point of view of the peasants, okay? Now if you talk about the British government, you realize that this is happening in 1859, right? Now that is 2 years after what can be called as the First War of Independence, which basically shook the British government to its absolute core. Right, so now you realize that the British government was concerned about the outbreak of another rebellion after 1857, and for the same reason, in order to so called extend their sympathy to the indigo cultivators, the lieutenant governor of the of that region toured the indigo planting regions in the year 1859, right? So a proper British officer of a high rank is now touring the places where indigo is grown in 1859, right? And there was a particular district magistrate as well, whose name was Ashley Eden. Okay, he was a district magistrate. He was one of the first people who issued a notice that the Ryots will not be forced to cultivate indigo. Right now, this is something that is legendary in its own way, because for the first time, a British officer, okay, a district magistrate, who's of course a British officer, issued a notice that Ryots will not be forced to cultivate indigo. And the Ryots, of course, considered this as a support for the rebellion, right? So the Ryots were of this opinion ki now there is a British officer, he is also supporting us, so our cause for our fight is justified, right? Now, see, you will realize that now the British are also sort of wanting to bring down the agitation, because not because they love the peasants. That's the last thing they will do. They are only concerned because they were worried about the outbreak of another rebellion after 1857. अपने पास एक और rebellion they did not want. ठीक है? And you will also see that in this particular situation, that the rebellion was gaining the support of the intellectual class, right? Your scholars, your professors, and basically civil society, right, of Calcutta, where all of this was happening in West Bengal at that point of time, Bengal, so to speak. So all this intellectual class, of course, they were literary people, so they wrote about the misery of the Ryots and the tyranny and the absolute brutality of the planters, right? Since the agitation was simmering further and further and further, the British decided that now it was time to take some stern action. So the first thing they did was, of course, they wanted to protect the planters. So they brought in the military to protect the planters. They were like, the planters should not be harmed, because the farmers are getting violent with each passing second. They're getting angrier with each passing second. And they might end up murdering, plundering, killing, torturing the planters. So that should not happen, okay? Right. And for the first time ever, they set up an inquiry committee, okay? They set up an inquiry committee, which was known as the Indigo Commission. Okay, it's not very complicated. Since it was supposed to look into the malpractices going on in the indigo production business, it was known as the Indigo Commission. Okay, so basically the idea was to inquire into the system of indigo production. Very fair and very simple, right? Okay, and for the first time probably, the commission declared that the planters were guilty. Okay, for the first time, they declared that the European planters were guilty. It accused the planters of treating the farmers unfairly, of usurping all the profit for themselves and not giving a single penny to the farmers. Right, and the Indigo Commission said that indigo cultivation was not profitable for the Ryots, right? It acknowledged that. Okay. And as a solution, so when I talk about what was the solution given by the Indigo Commission, the solution that was given by the Indigo Commission was that the Ryots will fulfill their existing contracts, right? So say for example, one planter and one farmer have signed a contract for say 2 years, right? So this contract will be completed by the Ryots, as in their existing contracts will be fulfilled, but in future if they want to refuse indigo cultivation, they can do so. So the commission allowed them to refuse indigo cultivation in the future. So this was the Blue Rebellion, or otherwise we could call it the Indigo Rebellion, right? So this is what the backdrop was. Okay, so this is of course this initial part is of course the backdrop. What is happening by March 1859, and of course the Gomasthas being beaten up, Ryots swearing not to take money from the planters, getting the support of the local zamindars. All of this is the actual rebellion itself. And the aftermath is that the British government is becoming afraid of another rebellion. The lieutenant governor is taking action. The district magistrate is taking action. Okay, the intellectual class of Calcutta is supporting. Indigo Commission is being set up, etc., etc. So this was basically what is the Blue Rebellion. I hope you found some value in this tutorial and that it made sense. Please do reach out in case there are any doubts, and I shall see you the next time. Bye bye.